This week on Christian World News, Turkey's blitz into Syria. Christians and Kurds fight for their homeland, while Turkey's President Erdogan calls his fighters an army of Muhammad. Plus, in the Islamic nation of Turkey, the government labels Christians enemies of the state, and foreign missionaries are being arrested and kicked out. And America and the Kurds, why U.S. evangelicals see a beacon of hope in the Middle East. Welcome to Christian World News, everyone. I'm Wendy Griffith. We begin in Syria, where thousands of Christians, Kurds, and Yazidis are fleeing the Turkish invasion of northeast Syria. The Turkish army and its allies pounded Syrian democratic forces from the air and from the ground. Jihadist troops from the Free Syrian Army are fighting alongside Turkey, a NATO member. The invasion stretches the nearly 300-mile northeast Syrian-Turkish border. Humanitarian aid agencies warn up to 250,000 people may be displaced. The White House says Turkey had promised to protect civilians and religious minorities, including Christians, but they've already broken that pledge. President Trump was asked if he would support sanctions against Turkey.
Let's see what happens. We are going to possibly do something very, very tough with respect to sanctions and other financial things.
Meanwhile, the fighting continues. These Christian fighters came to this church you see here, kissed the Bible, and then headed back to the front lines to defend their homeland against the Turks. Turkey's President Erdogan is calling his soldiers a, quote, Mohammedan army. Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell joins us now from Jerusalem. Chris, good to see you.
Good to see you, Wendy.
Chris, why would President Erdogan call his army a Mohammedan army?
Well, he does that, I think, Wendy, because I think he looks at it through the eyes of the Quran, through the eyes of jihad. We've reported earlier that a pro-Erdogan newspaper said that the army of Muhammad is going after the unbelievers. Now, the unbelievers are Christians, Yazidis, Kurds, anyone who doesn't follow the religion of Muhammad. And also, we've reported that back in Afrin, which is in March of 2018, the Turkish army, along with jihadists, the Free Syrian Army, which is a misnomer, actually went into that city. They burned churches, hunted Christians, and then ethnically cleansed hundreds of thousands of Kurds. So I think that's a model of what we're seeing right now, what Erdogan would like to do. And I think you all have to see it through the prism of the Quran, through Islam, and what they're doing against the infidels or the unbelievers.
Chris, tell us about the Christians in this region. What's their history and what's happening to them right now?
Well, part of their history, when we were there earlier this year, Wendy, we heard it. And part of the people that live there right now are the grandsons and daughters or great-grandsons and daughters of people who fled what's called the Armenian genocide. That was back in the early 1900s when more than 1 million Armenians were killed by the Turkish people. They fled and they went to this area in northeast Syria. And now when we were there back earlier this year, that's exactly what we heard. They have this historic collective memory of genocide. And the number one fear they all had at that time was that Turkey would come in and do the same thing they did to their ancestors, their grandfathers or great-grandfathers. So they see what's happening right now as just a repeat of what was happening back in the early 1900s. However, the difference here is really the whole world is watching, and I don't think Erdogan will be able to have this area ethnically cleansed like he hopes to.
Yeah, we're already seeing some horrific pictures out of that area. And this area of Syria is unique, right? Because it's democratic and it guarantees religious freedom. Tell us more about that.
It's an amazing story, Wendy, and that's what we found when we were there earlier this year. It's democratic, representative, puts a priority on women representation. They require that 40% of the representatives have to be women. Someone has described it as a tree of liberty in the middle of the Middle East, and I think that's such an accurate description. But unfortunately, and perhaps tragically, President Erdogan is literally trying to cut that tree down and snuff out this freedom and there in the Middle East. And it also has religious freedom, which is also unusual in the Middle East, and which is unprecedented. It allows people to change their faith. So we, for example, sat down and broke bread with a pastor of the Church of the Brethren in Kobani. He's a former Muslim. He came to faith through a dream when he saw Jesus, but that was tolerated, that was accepted in this part of northeast Syria.
And of course, right now, a lot of those folks are on the run, aren't they?
Literally. I mean, we talked to Pastor Zani, this man I was talking to you about, the other night. His wife, Chinar, their baby, she's pregnant. She had already fled for a safe area. He stayed along with the men. We understand there might have been an attack on that city yesterday. We haven't been able to get in touch with them just yet, but literally they are fearing for their lives, sometimes running for their lives. So they need prayers for God to protect them.
And Chris, Pastor Andrew Brunson, who spent 2 years falsely imprisoned by Turkey, he said while he was in prison, he had a dream there, a prophetic dream about Turkey and Russia working together, and that it's part of a biblical prophecy that he believes is now coming to pass. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's prophetic, and I think you need to take some of these dreams seriously, especially by a man as Pastor Brunson, who literally was persecuted and imprisoned for his faith. The good news is he also felt that there would be a spiritual revival in Turkey. So I think that's part of the good news. And I think he's right about that. Turkey actually has been one of the most non-Christian countries in the whole world. Yet it's a biblical land because he's where the 7 churches of Revelation are from. And I also think, when people have dreams like this, many times it's both a warning and an encouragement for believers around the world to pray that maybe this evil alliance will not bear the fruit that Andrew Brunson saw in his dream. But it's a very important dream, and Andrew Brunson actually is going to be celebrated for his life this week in Washington, D.C. So he's a great guy, and I think this dream is something we need to pay attention to.
Absolutely. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. Shabbat shalom to you and everybody in Israel. God bless you.
Thanks, Wendy. God bless you, too.
Coming up, Christianity in Turkey goes back to New Testament times. But today, the Islamic nation sees Christians as enemies of the state. A live interview with George Thomas when we come back. And welcome back to Christian World News. Turkey's church is facing increasing pressure from the government. Pastor Andrew Brunson spent 2 years in prison and under house arrest in Turkey, accused of being a terrorist by the Erdogan government. He told the U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom the same tactic is being used against other foreign Christians, and Turkish leaders fear they could be next.
Another Turkish church leader wrote to me a few days ago. He said, some Turkish Christians have started to ask, after the foreigners are sent away, what will the government do to us? And this is a good question. According to some Turkish leaders, there is, I quote, an expectation of an action from the government against Turkish church leaders. Arrest, investigations, we don't know. So I think the accelerated deportation of church leaders is a sign of very dark times to come. Turkey is not there yet, but it is careening in the wrong direction.
Turkey's church is very small. There are only about 6,000 Muslim background believers in the nation of 80 million people. CBN senior international correspondent George Thomas joins us now from Turkey. George, good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you, too.
Well, George, since Pastor Brunson's release, a dramatic number of foreign missionaries have been deported. What can you tell us about that?
That's correct. And just in the last several months, the official numbers are close to about 25 foreign expatriates have been deported. And keep in mind, Wendy, these are folks who have been in this country for almost all their lives, 15, 20, 30 years. And these are folks who were entrenched in the community all across the country. They were doing tremendous work. And in one case, one individual was leaving the country, going on vacation, and at the airport here in Istanbul, he was notified that he will not be allowed to enter the country, to re-enter the country. And it's been the case for the other 25 missionaries and not missionaries, but foreign workers here in the country. So it's a very alarming trend.
Yeah, there's an attitude that Turkish Christians are not real Turks, but loyal to the West. Is that what you hear as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is not new. They've had this perception. Keep in mind the church is only about 30, 35 years old, and they have this mentality that the idea that a Turk can leave Islam and embrace Christianity is just such a foreign concept, and so they question the identity, the loyalty of a Turk. But keep in mind the Turkish believers that I've spoken to in the last few days that I've been here, they all love their country. They are so patriotic. They want to do good for their country. They want to make changes. They want to help develop the country. They are patriots to the core. And so they are actually trying to engage the government and saying, listen, just because we leave Islam, just because we decide to embrace another faith, doesn't mean that we are less Turk. We are more Turk. We love our country. And so there is this, not just here in the Middle East, but across the world, whether it's in Africa or Southeast Asia, there is this concept, this belief that if you are a Christian, then that means you must be loyal to the West because Christianity comes from the West. But again, Turks will constantly say to me, look, I love my country and I'm going to continue loving my country, even if it means believing in Jesus Christ.
But Andrew Brunson says, they could be next. They aren't as persecuted because they're Turkish as the foreign missionaries like Andrew Brunson, but he says they could be next.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And I did pose that question to several top leaders here in Turkey. Thus far, there is no indication whatsoever. There's no level of harassment, no level of persecution necessarily being targeted against the Turkish believers. Most of what's been happening has been targeting the foreign workers that live here in the country. So far, there is no indication. In fact, I asked the question to a top Turkish leader here, and he said, look, maybe this is God positioning us in a way to take a stronger, more prominent role within the Christian community here. They are ready. They are spiritually mature to take on that mantle. Obviously, they're very sad to see some of their very dear friends who have invested so much of their life in this country to see them gone. I will say this, there is a legal challenge. Some of those who were banned from the country are putting up a legal case and a class action lawsuit, so to speak, against the government to say, listen, you need to give us a reason why you are banning us from the country. So far, no government authority. They have hired Turkish lawyers to ask this question. Give us a reason as to why you are deporting us, why you are banning us from the country. And so this is an important step. It's basically serving notice to the government to say, listen, we've done nothing illegal. We've not engaged in any criminal activity. We are not a threat to the national security of Turkey. In fact, we love this country. We've spent most of our life. Our children have grown up here in some cases. And so that is, on one hand, a positive a positive step by those who have been banned from the country to levy a sort of a lawsuit against the government seeking answers for why this is happening.
George, one final question. What about the Christians fleeing persecution in Iran and other Middle Eastern nations? They often come to Turkey. How are they treated once they arrive in Turkey?
Surprisingly, there's no intimidation, there's no persecution of refugees, for example, from Iran, who I had a chance to spend quite some time with a number of them just a couple of days ago. And I mean, they face all kinds of other challenges. When you come as a refugee, you don't have access to healthcare, education, all kinds of other facilities. They are kind of in limbo, but they're not facing religious persecution because they have fled persecution in their other countries, whether it's Iran, Afghanistan, and Syria. So far, there's nothing against Christian refugees per se.
All right, George Thomas, we appreciate your insights. Thanks for joining us today. We'll hopefully check in with you later. God bless you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Well, up next, speaking out for the Kurds, why U.S. evangelicals are committed to protecting this mostly Muslim ethnic minority. The Turkish invasion of Syria has caused tensions between President Trump and some of his strongest supporters evangelical Christians. About 50 American forces pulled out of the area Monday after Trump announced the U.S. will not stand in the way of Turkey's move. That's led to criticism from evangelical leaders here in the U.S. Tony Perkins serves as the chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. On CBN's Faith Nation program, he says it's crucial to defend the territory's fledgling democracy and speak truth to power.
Look, we have deep respect and appreciation for what this president does. I pray for him every day. But I have an obligation, as do other evangelical leaders, to speak out for what we know to be right and to speak out in defense of others, first of the household of faith and then others. We believe every human being should have a right to believe as they choose and should be free to do so without threat of government or other actors.
Some may question why evangelicals are so supportive of the Kurds. That's because the Kurds are seen as natural allies on issues like Christians in the Middle East and the nation of Israel. As Chris Mitchell shows us, U.S. Christian leaders visited the Kurdish homeland in northern Iraq earlier this year.
In September 2017, the Kurds of northern Iraq voted overwhelmingly for independence. While they celebrated, much of the world either ignored their accomplishment or punished them economically. Because of a long history of betrayal, a Kurdish proverb says, "The only friends we have are the mountains." One goal behind this visit is that one day Christians around the world would become better friends to the Kurds than these mountains. These Christians, including many from the White House Faith Initiative, wanted to reach out to the Kurds. While an unofficial visit, their views could inform President Trump about the importance of the Kurdish people. They went to the front lines overlooking the Nineveh Plain and met with the Peshmerga, the Kurdish military responsible for pushing back ISIS.
I wish that every American could stand where we're standing today and get the briefing that we got from the Kurdish military officials who helped to liberate this part of Iraq.
Now with the ISIS caliphate basically destroyed, the Kurds and the U.S. face a common enemy, Iran. Shiite militias now control the Nineveh Plain.
Shia militias are a very serious danger because they are made by Iran and they are against any kind of freedom or human rights. So there is not a lot of differences between them and ISIS.
That's Iran. So Iran has a huge voice here in this part of the world, not only in Iran, but they have a huge voice here in Iraq.
Iran now largely controls 4 Mideast capitals: Beirut, Damascus, Baghdad, and Tehran. Given rising tension, the delegation sees the Kurds as a natural ally.
I think we need to understand that one of the most practical ways that we can love and stand with Israel and bless Israel in these days is to stand with the Kurds. Because if you look at the configuration of the Middle East today, the Kurds, 30 to 40 million people spread throughout Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Syria, that 40 million people is really the bulwark against Iranian expansionism.
Kurdish leaders told CBN News they're looking to America.
I want the Americans to know that the only allies of the Americans here in the Middle East are Israel and Kurdistan, and we would like them to support us.
And they're opposed to the kind of tyranny that Iran represents. And I think they can be a valuable ally to us.
The delegation plans to brief the White House about what they learned. With Iran and the U.S. on the brink of war, it promises to be a timely report about a key ally in the Middle East. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Iraqi Kurdistan.
Finally this week, Israel is celebrating a season of feasts. That's why thousands of Christians are on hand to pray for the Jewish nation. Emily Jones has that story and more from Jerusalem.
Thanks, Wendy. Welcome to Jerusalem for this Inside Israel report, where we tell you what's happening in Israel and the Middle East. The Bible tells us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and that's exactly what millions of Christians around the world stopped to do this week. On the first Sunday of every October, believers in every tribe and tongue pray for Israel. Organizers kicked off the prayer event by hosting a special time of worship and fellowship on the promenade overlooking the old city of Jerusalem.
Christians are discovering and rediscovering that their spiritual home, their spiritual root system is here in Jerusalem. This is the city of the Bible. This is the city of our patriarchs. This is the city that forms so much of the foundation of our faith and also our future hope.
Organizers estimate some 90 million people from 172 countries joined in for the Day of Prayer for the Peace of Jerusalem. Israeli archaeologists have unearthed a 5,000-year-old city dubbed the New York of the ancient Middle East. The massive Bronze Age city was uncovered in northern Israel, and experts say it is one of the first and largest cities in this region.
Here in Anasu, one of the earliest cities in the land of Israel was established. This is one of the most important sites today in the land of Israel, the city where about 5,000 to 6,000 people were living.
Archaeologists also discovered a temple in the city, and burnt animal bones point to ritual sacrifice. Experts also found rare figurines in the temple facility. Now that the site has been uncovered, officials are working to protect and preserve its remains. In just a few days, Jews in Israel and around the world will celebrate Sukkot, also known as the Feast of Tabernacles. During this time, many Israelis will build a sukkah, or a small tent outside their home, and live in it for an entire week. There they will eat, sleep, study, and pray together. It's a fun family holiday based on an ancient biblical command.
We're here in our sukkah. It helps us remember, first of all, we're commanded to remember the Exodus from Egypt and how we needed to wander through the desert for 40 years without permanent dwellings. But it also reminds us that even though we've been brought into the land of Israel, we haven't reached our final destination.
Sukkot is the third of the three pilgrimage festivals after Passover and Shavuot, when Jews throughout Israel were commanded to go up to Jerusalem. It's also a celebration of the fall harvest. You can see stories just like these and more this week on our Jerusalem Dateline program. That's it for Inside Israel this week. Wendy, back to you.
Thanks, Emily. So much going on in Jerusalem and the Middle East. So much to pray about. Well, thanks for joining us for this week. Until next week, from all of us here at Christian World News, have a great week. Goodbye. And as always, God bless you.